Hey guys, I'm so glad to talk to you again this midweek or whenever you're listening. Today, we are so thankful and excited that we get to talk to Megan Malone of Truity Psychometrics. We are so thankful to be able to engage with Truity again. You guys know them as doing such large, vast amounts of research across Enneagram. We couldn't be more thankful for the 88,000 person study they did on couples. And we got to talk about that on this podcast in the past. So make sure you listen for our Truity episodes of the past with Molly Owen, CEO. But today we get to talk to Megan, who really does walk us through not only some interesting research about Enneagram and income, but also some of the other tests and content creation she's been working on for Truity. So we are in for such a treat as we really engage with Megan and all she has to offer. And we get to talk and hack a little bit out about her typology as well, which I think some of you will really relate to because she didn't know her original type at first. So we're going to do that in just a minute, but I want to invite you, even in the show notes, to grab the Truity test and to take or retake it again, just because it's so helpful for you to really look at what other areas and what types are high for you right now. Because you might be listening to today's episode and say, oh, I'm not high at all in this income bracket with the types who usually make more or less. And then you might find, oh, I have some of that. And you'll hear us talk through some of this as well. But I just want to encourage you that Enneagram work is about expansion. It's about refinement of who you are and your best gifts, and also knowing where you're problematic sometimes, but it's also about learning from other types and trying to put those on in healthy ways too. So this gives us a chance to do that as we talk out what types make the most for their families, what types are maybe feeling like quality of life is more important than income, and we're not making any full value judgments about them or you, just noticing trends, just as Truity has done with other personality inventories as well. We've seen some of this with Myers-Briggs, DISC, Big Five, and now we get to bring Enneagram in. So I'm excited to do that with you guys. Also, really quick before we get on, I hope you got a chance to look at our Barbie article about just how the Barbie movie can teach us about how to walk through the existential crisis that often happens in life together as a culture. And also, that's on our blog over at enneagramandmarriage.com. And then be on the lookout for our marriage membership collective to be starting. We're starting very soon. And I'm really excited. We only get to open this a couple times a year because we are busy serving our clients and our collective already. But now we're going to be opening those doors again so that you could truly immerse in the work with community. We love to do that on a close level. And thank you so much if you took part in our survey or if you choose to take part in our survey, because we're so looking to know how we can serve you best. And I've already been seeing you guys want group coaching. You guys like to have exclusive PDFs and so much more. So we'll try to make sure we add in what we can and tweak what we need to do as well. So thank you for that. And thank you for all your support here. Let's make sure you're also, though, like I said, taking a look at the Truity test to see about where you're at and where you're headed towards, as well as kind of noticing where you think your spouse is at too. So, okay, let's talk to Megan here. Megan, I'm so happy to have you on the Enneagram and Marriage Pod. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. We were just chatting about our dogs before, and my dog is being mischievous behind me with the curtains. But if you're watching along on YouTube, Megan's dogs are right outside too, right?
Right outside the door, yeah. Hopefully you won't hear them. You might, I don't know. We'll see.
Yes, yes. Ever since COVID, we all understand all the dog
Yeah,
stuff with Zoom. So tell us
right.
about yourself and a little bit about your Enneagram type as we get to know you better.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a professional career coach. I've been doing that for about 2 years now. I have a master's in organizational development and leadership. And so my coaching is really focused on career leadership. I coach a lot of younger people moving into leadership roles for the first time. It's kind of an area that I focus on. I've also been working with Truity for about 3 years now. So I am their content strategist, and then I'm also a personality researcher. So I get to kind of dig into the data on a lot of the research that we do, and then present that kind of to our followers and our readers and stuff over at Truity. And so that's a lot of fun for me too. So that's a little bit about me. I'm an Enneagram Two, like I mentioned earlier. So that's something that was kind of a newer revelation for me. I used to identify as a nine. And then through talking with a lot of practitioners in the Enneagram and reading more about it, I realized that I'm actually a self-preservation two, which is
Mm.
the counter type of the two and has some overlapping traits with nine. And so that's why I had mistyped at that point in my life. And now I'm getting comfortable with the idea that I'm actually a two, which I
Yeah.
did not think was at all possible like 2 years ago. So it's been
Yeah.
a journey.
You really make a great point for those listening that sometimes you can mistype and sit with a type for years or maybe have traits high in both types like you. And I
Right.
love that you spent time learning because you're like, if I dig a little bit, I'm going to get some nuance for who I really am. And that's so helpful for all you do for a job, practically speaking, and of course for your relationships. So, but I love how you remind our audience like these instincts can change the way it looks. You said you're not that gregarious too that everyone sort of expects.
Right, exactly. When I read a lot of the general descriptions when I was first learning about the Enneagram, I was like, the two didn't really resonate with me super heavily. A little like parts of it
Mhm.
did, but overall, I was just like, no. And then I read the nine. I was like, that sounds a little bit more like me. I'm a little bit more reserved and
Mm.
quiet, and I'm not, super gregarious and expressive and stuff. And so I was like, well, that seems to fit. I'm going to go with it, even though it didn't feel 100%. And it really took really diving in deep and talking with a lot of experts on it and learning a lot more about the Enneagram, both before and with my work with Truity that helped me kind
Mm.
of get to my best fit type.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you did. And just hearing about how you're a content creator too, I can see how the heart of wanting to know is part of your two, and then your introverting is part of your research. I noticed that you're also an
Mhm.
INF. Is it INFJ?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, yes. And then also the fact that the nine part of you, I think nines are so good at knowing the culture around them and just so good at seeing what's happening. And so just looking at
Mhm.
Megan's articles, and I hope you guys will be checking them out, she really helps us to just understand our culture. In fact, my family was just having dinner last night and enjoying your article about what generation you're from.
Oh, yeah. That was our recent test. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Yeah, we
Um,
really had fun with that.
Yeah, I'm definitely someone who's very interested in research and data, but I'm not a super like numbers kind of analytical person. I really like being able to translate that to kind of layman's terms and ways that resonate with people, that are interested in what's like the meaning of this? Why is this important to me? I don't really care about looking at the numbers, but what am I getting from this? And that's what I get to do a lot of in my work with Truity that I really enjoy.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love pairing that statistics with the heart. That's the favorite math I like anyway because I'm like it's the one that's relational. So how beautiful
Yeah.
you can bring your heart for relationships in.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, today we're so grateful and thankful that we get to delve into something very practical for us, also with just noticing how we're looking at income with each of the types. And we know there's bell curves and nuances, but interestingly, you guys just did a relationship study that got mass news headlines all over the world because you found something out very interesting about Enneagram types. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so we ran a study, just published the results about a month ago. And basically, what we found is that there is a really large discrepancy between the highest earning Enneagram type, as self reported by the survey participants, and the lowest. There's about $35,000 a year difference.
Mm.
Between the highest earners, which happen to be threes, and the lowest self reported earners, which happen to be fours. What we also found in the survey was that the type three and the type eight tend to be the most likely to hold director or executive level positions. Probably not a big surprise for those of us who are familiar with threes and eights, but that came through in the data as well. So that kind of idea that we have or what we might suspect did seem to be true based on the
Mm.
information that we received.
That is fascinating. And right before I saw those, right before I saw those results, we had this pianist, this world famous pianist come on, Paul Cardall, and he said, I'm an Enneagram 4, but the only reason I've made money is because of my 3 and 8 traits. And then you guys
Hmm.
shared that, and I was like, oh my gosh, he totally knows himself.
Wow.
So he was
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, leaning into that 3 and that 8.
And it just helps me to feel like with all of us, like maybe even if you're not in the 3 and 8 space, you might even feel like I'm going to lean in a bit, just like you're here a 2 and that's your main gifting, but you're also leaning into some 9, which is
Mhm.
why I love your test at Truity because you guys do a pie chart, right?
Yes. Mhm. So we'll
Mm.
show you where like what your top your top types are. So it's not so
Mhm.
much like this is your type and this is your wing. It's like this is your what you're testing as your top type, but then maybe your second is actually, a 9. That's what you're reporting on the test.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
that's what you can get on the Truity test. Yeah.
I love that. And I hear you saying to keep grappling, keep having conversations around it. So many people
Right.
can give their identity away just by taking a test. And you're saying, let us grapple with you. Don't take it as, it has to be that if you were 90% this type and 85 this one, that it might not be reversed, right? Because you know yourself perhaps better than the test.
Absolutely. And I've done a few workshops with businesses and teams and that sort of thing. And that's what I always say as well
Mm.
is, you know, look at this as kind of a guide for
Mhm.
you, but continue diving in on your own and figure out for yourself what makes the most sense. And most of the time, it's probably going to be that that top type is your type. But when you dig into it, it might be like me, where I thought I was a 9 and it turns out I
Mhm.
was actually a 2. And that's
Mhm.
because I resonate a lot with both of those types. And
Mhm.
so it really helps to, again, just continuing to take in information and learn and talk to other people and figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, good reminder. And I love that you have that free version. Now tell us when we think about the 3 and the 8 and the 4, why are you guys over there hypothesizing? You said some of us know the 3 and the 8, but tell us a little bit more about like why do we feel like those types are more likely to and do make higher income?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. I think with threes in particular, so threes
Mhm.
reported earning about 8,000 more a year on average than eights. Eights were the second highest earners, but threes were still pretty significantly higher. They earn the average was reported about $90,000 a year.
Mhm.
Um, so threes are very motivated, by external rewards and that sort of
Mhm.
thing, and so they're very driven to climbing the ladder, earning a higher income, seeking that promotion. Those things are extremely motivating for them. And so they fit in really well with that kind of corporate culture that rewards that kind of behavior, right?
Yeah.
Um, the other thing to consider is that a lot of corporate culture is very driven kind of by that 3 and that 8
Mhm.
motivations.
Mhm.
So, and you'll even see this when I do workshops. A lot of times, if it's a corporate team, majority of people on the team are going to be threes or eights, right? Unless maybe
Mhm.
it's something like, a quality control team might be more sixes, or,
Yeah.
editors might be more ones or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I
for
see
the
it.
most part, a lot of teams have a lot of threes and eights. And so that culture kind of forms around those personality types and then is rewarded. Those types are the ones that are rewarded. And so
Mm.
it's kind of the internal and the external factors are just kind of the perfect storm, especially in corporate America, that really kind of rewards threes and eights in that way.
Mhm.
Of course, this is not a just I don't want to generalize and say this is true for
Yeah.
everyone, of course, because
Yeah.
any type can be extremely successful in the
Yes.
workplace. And so that's something
Yes.
that's important to remember. It's also
Mhm.
important to remember that there's a number of other factors and socioeconomic factors that can
Ugh,
impact someone's income. And we shouldn't look at the Enneagram as like the end all be all when it comes to your earning potential. This is just what we found looking at the data. So,
yeah. Oh my gosh. You couldn't have said that better. Like, this is so important for everyone listening to know both that you can make different stories than just your Enneagram number, as
right.
well as you can become more expansive. And you're also reminding everybody you can also look at all the other factors. I mean, you have such a story just because you're you and your own part of the world and in your own generation. And so I'm grateful you're
Okay.
reminding us of that. But you're just saying, hey, these people are in the corporate world and they are assertive types, independent types. They're making their way out there. And so if other types want to take on some of those traits, maybe you can tell us what they might be trying to do, even in terms of like you also say Myers-Briggs and the big five, that sometimes you just know, you probably see some correlations, like what are the traits if people want to pick it up a little bit and say, I want to put on my 3 and my 8 more.
Right. Well, you mentioned the Myers-Briggs. Truity actually did a study back in 2019 that looked at Myers-Briggs and income. And we found some pretty interesting results there too. Like the ENTJ and the ESTJ were the highest earners by far. And I think, INFPs and maybe ISFPs were the lower earners. And you can kind of pull similar findings from that study and the Enneagram study, when we're thinking about, what does this mean for us in the workplace? What do these types have in common? Enneagram threes and Enneagram eights, just like ENTJs and ESTJs, they tend to be more confident types, more assertive types, perhaps more decisive. Threes are going to be more maybe people focused and charismatic, and they're going to be able to kind of use that as leverage, whereas eights are going to be very, action oriented and decisive. And so when we think about traditional leadership skills in the workplace, these are the skills that we think of.
Mm,
So other types can really kind of look to them, and threes and eights are extremely inspirational
mhm.
people. I think, at
Yeah,
least,
I do
as a two,
too.
I think the threes and the eights in my life are very inspirational, especially when you're thinking about like wanting to grow your confidence or your charisma, or your decisiveness. And so I think those are really some of the skills that can be leaned into a little bit more. At the same time, you need to ask yourself, how can I do this in a way that's authentic to me? Because if it feels really inauthentic to you, or
Yeah,
you're trying to be someone you're not, then you're not going to be happy
right.
at your job. So you've got to consider that factor as well.
Isn't that true? I know that my type 4, the lowest, quota earner,
Mhm.
said, and you guys just heard me say that Paul Cardall is not in that camp because he leans on his 3 and his 8, even though he's a 4. But she's like, money isn't important to me at all. And she's graduated high school and she's just in that space of like the idealism of it. And so I think sometimes there's even seasons of life where you're like, I am content with this and I want very small things. And she might be that way her whole life. Or sometimes people may ebb and flow, I would imagine, with the generations they're in and say, you know what, I am a 4, or I am, I think 5 was maybe one of the lower earners as well, statistically, but I want to kick it into gear. Have you guys noticed that across a lifespan?
That's an interesting question. So the people we surveyed for this in particular study were between the ages of 26 and 45, and we didn't break it down a lot by age. I would imagine, though, as we grow and we kind of lean into our wings or our arrows or these other kind of Enneagram energies that we have, um, you're going to see maybe more of that. A 4 that's like, I don't care about money, might think differently in 10 or 20 years, when they get into the
Mm.
workplace and they start realizing, like, okay, maybe maybe I do want money, or maybe they won't. It's hard to say. Everyone's different and unique in that way.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I could definitely see that kind of changing over time.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
I think at the same time that it's just a truth that certain types are less motivated by money. And we actually did an Enneagram and financial habits study. I think that was back in 2021. Trudy did. And we found that actually twos and nines were the least likely to say they were motivated by money, out of all the
Mhm.
types. And fours also reported not being very motivated by money and also not being very fulfilled by their careers, out of all the types. And so that was some interesting findings as well.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And you're making me think about how we pair up sometimes with people who are opposite in that way. And I know you and I have talked, well, Trudy and I have talked about how there's a very common pairing with the 8 and the 9. And that's one of the types you said who doesn't care as much about money with the 9, and then the 8 who makes more. And so I think oftentimes what we're noticing is there's an opposite pairing. And so one might be the money earner and the other one isn't. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that can be the case in a lot of relationships where maybe one person's happy to be like, you make the money, I can pursue my passion or what I want. In other circumstances, it might be that they kind of find balance in each other, or they can inspire each other. The eight can maybe inspire the four, or the three can inspire the two, to kind of go after things and ask for what they want at work. And maybe the two or the four is helping the three and the eight, get more in touch with, their actual feelings and desires and passions and that kind of thing. And so that can kind of be a beautiful relationship dynamic.
Thank you for reminding us of that. Because I was going to say that, like, how do people balance with each other? Like these aggressive, assertive types, like, how can they learn from somebody like you who's relational? And it sounds like you're saying they can, appreciate that they're gifted with making money, but remember that life is also about quality even more. So being with people who know
Yeah.
how to nurture and not just, run through the rat race or, hurt people. Of course, we would never want a 3 or an 8 to be making money unethically. Do you feel like sometimes these other personalities can sort of soften them?
I do. And I think that's a great thing. And I think that's something that personally I would like to see even more of in workplaces. Because again, I think so many workplaces are very 3 and 8 heavy.
Mm.
Um, Again, I mastered in organizational development. So that I know that things like emotional intelligence and kind of soft skills and people skills are becoming more and more important in workplaces now. And I think that's an amazing thing. Um, because I think that oftentimes when types like twos or nines or fours are represented on teams in the workplace, they're often overlooked, or those skills that they bring are often overlooked. Not in all situations, obviously, in helping and service oriented professions, that's not the case. But I'm talking again more about like business or corporate kind of
Mhm.
work. And it's because the threes and the eights are very action oriented, and they're like, let's be efficient, let's be productive, let's go after what we want. And that's very inspiring and motivating to an extent, but that also overlooks some of these other really important skills. And so one great thing that the Enneagram can do for work teams, for example, is remind them of the importance of all these other strengths that may or may not be represented on their team, or may or may not be being overlooked on their team.
That is so critical, you guys, because she's reminding you, yes, use this in your relationships, but also bringing your skills about personality into your jobs is so critical because you're right, Megan. I feel like a lot of nines, for instance, get overlooked with their thoughtfulness of others and they're listening to every perspective. And then that 8 can get very frustrated and say, like, you're not acting as quickly as me. And therefore, I feel my vengeance rising up and I'm done with you. And they might miss that they have the beautiful action, but the 9 has the beautiful gift of bringing a bit of fun or lightness or even seeing every perspective. And so I think you're right that the culture is richer. Have you noticed that in your organizational development with you when you use Enneagram, that if they can invite more pieces in, that it is richer?
I think absolutely, yeah. The more kind of cognitive diversity and stuff that you have on a team, I
Mhm.
think the better in almost every case. I think another important factor though is, are those different perspectives, those other people that you're bringing in, are they being listened to, heard? Is their contribution being considered, or are we just going with the culture of the organization and kind of ignoring things that get in the way of that? Because that can happen too. And again, I coach people that work in these types of settings of various personality types, and so I know the struggles that they go through too. And they feel that they're overlooked, or they're not being understood, or
Mm.
the problems that they see are not being seen by other people, and that can be very frustrating. So being in an enneagram the enneagram sense, minority in terms of how you're thinking about things, like that can be very difficult at work, because you just don't kind of jive with the world around you. So
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great reminder for us when you say sometimes they just push ahead with the culture that they've already created.
yeah.
And I think that that's a very real, stark reality. And I've seen your article recently on discussing some of the negative traits that can show up in work environments. And I'm glad you're reminding us that we could choose to stay in those cultures. We could say, okay, I'm pushing ahead because I have this, one line, one track way of thinking. And you're saying, like, the more diversity within your typology and otherwise, the richer the experience for your whole organization. And I think that we forget that. And I love that your 9 gift probably brings that in too.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think, it's a great point that, um, that it does get kind of overlooked because we just kind of go with the flow or we just get used to things. And even, the 4s or the 2s or maybe less represented people in the organization, just kind of, especially if they're not really paying attention to their own needs or their own wants, it's kind of like, well, I'll just go with the flow. I'll just kind of do what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And they might not be happy with it, but they're like, this is just how it is. So I'm going to do it. And,
Yes.
where you get stuck and that's where you get in the rut or you start getting burned out and you don't really realize what's going on or why you're not happy or what you need. And it's
Mhm.
often because of all these different factors that are happening around you
Mm.
and
So
within you.
yeah, and just knowing somebody's a heart type, even if you're like somebody's a 2, 3, or 4, they're a heart type, or they're somebody who cares about justice in that 8, 9, or 1 space, or they're such a thinker in that 5, 6, 7 space. For me on my team, that's made a huge difference because we have a couple 1s, we have a 4, we have a 9, and then myself a 7. We have coaches that are all the different types. And on my
Mhm.
local therapist team, we also have some 2s mixed in and a 9. But what I've really come to learn about, for instance, my 4 that I mentioned is that if I forget the heart aspect of the job and I just reward like a quick verbal praise and I keep using my aggressive assertive stance to push us forward, I miss an opportunity for relationship on my team. And
Mhm.
I think that, like you said, short term they can just deflate a little bit and keep kind of plodding on, but long
Mhm.
term you're going to miss their beautiful gifts if you don't stop to nurture your people in the way they desire.
Yeah, and that's gonna impact how you retain people and that kind of stuff as well. I mean, if people
Mhm.
don't feel valued, for their gifts and the strengths that they offer, they're not gonna stick around, and for sure that has been my case in the past with other jobs, is I'll stay for a year or 2, and then I'm like, I'm gonna get out of here because I don't feel like I'm, being appreciated or whatever in this role."
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is so life to our listeners. So please know this if you are a business owner that using personality study helps so practically here. And do you, before we end, I was going to ask, I definitely want everyone to go to your awesome test and to see this study for themselves. But do you recommend another test also just that you love, like Big Five or MBTI for our listeners to really delve into if they want to do some more of this work?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think any personality test is a great way to kind of just increase your self-awareness, so would definitely recommend diving more into them. My other favorite is probably the Myers-Briggs. Truity has a version of that called the Type Finder on their site if you wanna check that out. It's a great Myers-Briggs test. The disc is also really good if you just want something that's kind of simple and easy to interpret and easy to apply. It's very practical. So it's a favorite among a lot of teams, workplace teams that want to just kind of understand it, personality in a really simple way and then have some actionable insights that they can take and kind of work with. And of course, the Big Five is great as well. And so any of them I would recommend.
Okay, I love that, but I love that you're saying Myers-Briggs is one of your absolute favorites otherwise, but that you're recommending DISC and the Big Five, and the cool thing is you guys have really shared all of these at Truity, right?
Yes, we have all of these on Truity. You can take any of the tests for free. All of them have a full paid report, so you do have to pay to get your full results, but you can get a little snippet just
Mhm.
after taking the test. And we also have these tests for workplaces. So if you're an HR manager or a team leader or an executive or whoever, and you want to have this for your team, we have that available as well.
So helpful. I'm looking forward to sharing that with the team I'm speaking to. And I love that I have that access to that workplace test too. And it's so reasonably priced. So we will put your free test, and the paid version is after that. If you guys want to order that up, you can, but we'll put that in the show notes along with your wonderful results here. How can everybody find you in general and your work, Megan?
Yeah. So for me, you can just find me on social media. My name is Megan and Malone on Twitter, Instagram, Threads recently. And then Truity, you can look up all of our work. We publish all of our research and a lot of other really good content on our blog just about personality type in general. We use, of course, all the different systems. So we're constantly publishing free information, videos, stuff like that on social media and on our website. So you can find us at truity.com, and then Truity Labs on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Threads, all the above.
Oh my gosh. Well, this is so helpful. I love your team. You guys, I see all the Enneagram types represented when I get to talk to your editor in her 1 space, and then Abby in her 3 space. And I love Samantha in her 7 space, and Molly, the head of it all, in her 4 space. Once again,
Yeah,
showing us fours can be major, awesome leaders.
yep.
So, so cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Megan. And we are just so grateful. Have such a good
Yeah.
day.
Thank you, Krista.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for taking part in this fun episode today. It felt lighter to me just because we were able to talk about some major trends. I have all the desires to go hacking into Myers-Briggs, and I try to do these kinds of things on my personal time, but there isn't much of that, as you know. So I will be continuing my exploration into the other tests as much as I can and adding those nuances to us here. But in the meantime, just make sure you're taking one thing from today's episode. Put it in your mind right now. What can you bring forth for your family, for you, for healthy balance? What can you learn from those types who are actively really able to make more money? But also, maybe if that's you, what can you learn from the other types who maybe need you to pull them in more with encouragement and support? Because we're all about social outreach here too. So we want to balance you taking care of your family, you taking care of your marriage, and you taking care of your community. Oh my gosh, that's a fulfilling life. So, anyway, thank you guys so much. I'll talk to you soon about the collective, and make sure you head over to the notes for all Truity has to offer. All right, bye bye.